Bill Connelly, who does a great job covering many things, ESPN. He put up a graphic, and it was about the Big 12 and who they are, not right now, but also who they will be when everybody joins, of course, with what they do with Brigham Young and UCF and Cincinnati and also Houston. I reached out to Bill, asked him if he'd come on. We have the graphic he put up, and we've been able to kind of make it more what's television ready and readable. Bill, good afternoon. Thanks for your time. How you been, sir?
I'm pretty good. You mean giant spreadsheets don't look good on television?
Yeah, it's we have a graphics person in Jack that he found a way. And by the way, what made you, was it just because of all the changes in college football to kind of look ahead to see how things were going to act, how things would shake up?
Yeah, I mean, that was basically, I think, early in the season or after the big round of announcements was made. I kind of looked at it from a 5-year history perspective and whatnot, so I thought it was just a good time with the regular season ending to kind of check in and see how this year would have looked. And, you know, it's I mean, it tells the story you basically expect it to, I guess, but it was pretty interesting the way this year played out.
Do people maybe not understand that the Big 12 has been a consistently pretty good conference? I mean, I know people get blinded by the SEC lights, but because Texas hasn't been very good, is that the national thing? Well, Texas isn't good, so it's Oklahoma's conference and no one else.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that's kind of the impression. Well, and I mean, you know, when the same team wins the conference every year, that certainly is going to feed that, along with the Big Ten and ACC and all that. But it is kind of an interesting discussion because, you know, when OU and Texas announced they were leaving, you know, those are certainly the two biggest names, the two biggest, you know, money makers in the conference, without a doubt. It really, I mean, Oklahoma has been the best of late, but yeah, like you said, Texas hasn't been the second best, and so they're not, in terms of immediate just quality, they're not really losing anything they can't replace in that regard. And it makes it kind of interesting. I mean, everybody's going to make less money, I guess, but the quality of the conference doesn't really have to suffer all that much.
Yeah, and I think that you never know, and we had Bob Bowlesby on our pregame show Saturday from the Big 12 championship game, that there is another network or two that is talking to the Big 12 about the television deal in the future. And anybody, you know, if you have one person, that's fine. But if you have two, you know that it might end up being more, right, because you start having competition on what might be. So, all right, Jack Armstrong, we have the graphic. Bill Connelly, ESPN.com. This is the graphic that he put up. This is part of it. And how he basically has, in the left-hand side, you have Cincinnati, Houston, Texas Tech, and UCF in light blue, kind of a teal. Oklahoma, Texas in red, and, of course, they're leaving. And then the Big 12 Conference going forward. Tell everybody kind of what you found. You mentioned kind of what you found, but the numbers of where they are and how they're still basically a more solid number 3 now than they even were with what they have right now?
Yeah, I mean, this is my SC Plus ratings that I post each week at ESPN, and it really is. I mean, this year is an exaggeration. Obviously, this might be the best Cincinnati team ever. This is the best Oklahoma State team in a few years. You know, Baylor bounced back, all that. Like, it looks better than it would have in 2020, for instance. But it's still, I mean, you know, Oklahoma, you know, that is a loss. That's losing a top 20 team, but you're adding Cincinnati. You're adding an almost top 30 team in Houston. You're adding a usual top 40 team in BYU. So it ends up grading out to be the third best conference overall, whether you're looking at just the conference averages, like all teams' ratings, whether you're looking at just the top 5. It ends up grading out pretty equal to the ACC. Obviously, the Pac-12 is more down than normal this year, and so it's not usually down that far. But no matter how we, you know, whatever specifics we use, this is a power conference. It's far closer to the ACCs of the world than the AACs, especially the new AAC. And it's just, it's just by any definition, it's a power conference.
So, yeah, and now we hear about Power 5 when Texas and Oklahoma decided that news popped before they even wanted it to. Oh, my God, the Big 12 is going to evaporate. And that was probably what Texas and Oklahoma was hoping would happen. But in the end, and yes, they're losing 2 huge names and logos and production and all that. But do you feel like that they're as solidified as a Power 5 as they are now, and anyone that thinks otherwise is just a lazy narrative?
Yeah, I mean, I would hope, like, they're obviously now they're without the bell cows, so to speak. And I get that maybe that makes a difference on the TV side. But from a quality side, you now have a power conference where you don't know who's going to win it in a given year. And you could end up with just a long string of close games and important finishes and a conference title game, obviously, in a 12-team playoff era where, you're probably playing for a top 4 seed as often as not. So it's still pretty good living. And I get that, money goes down and that's not good. But Cincinnati built this team that they have currently on an AAC, money level. And that it's only going to help them moving to the Big 12. So there's plenty to enjoy. I get the money and you can't help that. But there's still going to be a lot to like about this conference.
We when we were looking for a picture for you today online, Bill, one of the things that popped up was Bill Connelly for college football commissioner.
Yeah.
Oh my God! Please.
That was like 2017. It feels like 27 years ago, but it was like 4 or 5 years ago. That was a very fun thing to put together.
Yeah. Okay. So if you had that job, right, given everything that's changed in those 4 or 5 years, if you had that job today, what would be your first order of business?
Oh man, I think it's just so weird trying to watch everybody plot a path forward, and especially when paying players or a 12-team playoff, all these bigger discussions, and nobody has to actually talk to each other. Nobody has to make or will make a decision based on the entire sport as a whole. And it's just been, it's played out, the last 2 years have played out like you would expect when nobody's in charge. So, well, the first order of business would be, just kind of laying out a path forward for some of these big things, because, the OU and Texas are leaving for the SEC in part because they quote unquote didn't want to get left behind. That's what they said. That's what, Florida State's AD said over the summer. That's what all those soccer teams in April said when the Super League thing happened. Like, we didn't want to be left behind. And that's what happens when you're completely rudderless. Like, there's no vision here. And so they're going to make decisions out of fear, and it's going to lead us to a weird place. So a vision for the sport is needed now more than ever. I don't have any idea how that happens with the current leadership.
Bill, what would you do about the playoff?
I was always, I espoused an 8-team playoff for a very long time, and I was always fine with that. 6 conference champions, 2 at-larges, there you go. We played with hypotheticals over and over. I never touched the 12. 12 never even entered my mind, but now that they've introduced it, I certainly get it. I don't mind a 12-team playoff at all. It ended up, when we simulated like the last 7 seasons, it was like 30% of FBS makes the playoff at least once in that time period. And you think about a conference like the Big 12 where you're getting 1 in for sure, you'll get 2 in occasionally, and the balance of power changes so much that pretty much everybody's involved in the playoff at some point. That's pretty good living, I think. And so I've always been okay with 8, but I've come around to 12 in this whole deal.
I saw your article, in the column is college football championship thoughts, Georgia's quarterback quandary, Michigan clearing hurdles, and of course Michigan, Jim Harbaugh named AP Coach of the Year today. The quarterback quandary of Georgia, how do you feel like that might shake out?
Well, I figure the most likely odds are it shakes out by Kirby Smart continuing to start Stetson Bennett. He's a pretty conservative guy by nature. It's a really weird time to make a change, but they almost paid for being as dominant as they were in the regular season. They kind of paid for that in the SEC championship, because we got to the end of the year here. He didn't want to change from Stetson Bennett because they were winning every game by 40. But then we found out in the SEC championship that if it's a quarterback versus quarterback duel in a big time game, he's still going to make more mistakes than the other quarterback. So it's a really weird place for Kirby to be right now, thinking about potentially making a quarterback change that might lower your ceiling, might result in you maybe having worse odds of beating Michigan, but better odds of beating Alabama if you get by Michigan. And it's a really, I don't know what you do. I figure he probably sticks with Bennett, but there's absolute justification for maybe swinging for a little more upside.
Bill, this has been one of the craziest coaching carousels, ever, right? Just your thoughts on kind of how all of this has unfolded. And now we see that Oregon's going with Dan Lanning, defensive coordinator at Georgia.
But maybe not.
Well, maybe not.
Now they're saying that Oregon sources are saying it's not confirmed. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution is they're sticking to it. They believe it. So
okay, so your thoughts on the coaching carousel, Bill, minus what may be the final punctuation there with Oregon.
Yeah, it almost feels boring when you just now promote a defensive coordinator to the main job. You're supposed to steal somebody else's head coach. It's going to be a weird couple of years, and I think part of it, the contract, the Jimbo contract from a few years ago. But then once Texas and Auburn made it kind of okay to spend $20+ million on a buyout in a pandemic, I think that certainly tore down a couple walls. And then the Mel Tucker contract, 10 years, $95 million for one good year. I think that's created such a strange imbalance that it's going to kind of, until the salaries until all the top coaches are making around the same amount of money again, we're going to see some wild moves. I think it's not going to stop this year, and it's not going to stop if if they push the national signing day back again. That might change the timeline, but we're still going to see some wild moves, I think.
On your Twitter feed, it's at ESPN_Bill C. By the way, ESPN writer, this and that, author of books, all the good stuff, but professional nerd. What do you have to do to become a professional nerd? Just be a numbers crunching analytical guy?
I mean, tweet out a bunch of spreadsheet screenshots. I think that's a pretty good start. It kind of worked in this case. So that's definitely step one.
Hey, thank you, Bill. Appreciate it. Enjoy your weekend and keep up the good work. Appreciate you, buddy.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Bill Connelly, ESPN. Again, that graphic. Put that up one more time, Armstrong, if you don't mind, if you can. So it's just kind of condensed from what was there of the blue, the teal, teams coming in, the red teams leaving, and, of course, to the right, the various rankings of where they are now compared to the newness of what will happen in the summer of 2023.
He does bring up a good point. I mean, as far as the Big 12 news, there could not have been a better year for it to happen.
No.
I mean, in terms of Cincinnati and BYU and just the success, Houston, really UCF, the only school that didn't really have that, remarkable of a year of the four that are going to be coming in. So, I mean, to have three of those four all reach double-digit wins and be in the mix is it's a big deal. So, that's great. It could have been very well a situation where if it would have happened next year, it's not even close to the same. So I think the timing actually worked out pretty well for the Big 12. And we'll see, obviously, over the next season or two before those teams enter. But, it's very interesting to look at. I think the Big 12 is certainly the third strongest conference. I mean, I think just across the board, I think you look at, results. I think you look at the head coaches in place, the programs and where they are. And even, some of the lower level teams in the Big 12 like Kansas now. Kansas is, I know people may laugh, but if you look at the way they finished the year and Lance Leipold and what he can do in the offseason, now that he actually has an offseason, I expect Kansas to be way better next year. Not competing for titles, but I expect them to be much improved. TCU should be improved from this year. Texas Tech should be improved from this year. Baylor's not going anywhere. So, I think there's a lot of potential for this conference, and you throw in some new teams, and this will be the same effect for the SEC as well, with Oklahoma and Texas providing some fresh matchups. But once we start getting that Cincy, Baylor, and BYU, West Virginia and things like that, that's going to be a lot of fun, man. I'm looking forward to it, and I'm pumped about the Sataki news. I think that's great for BYU. And now, though, you got to worry about the Oregon job. Like, is it filled or is it not filled? But, man, if the Atlanta Journal-Constitution ran with that and was wrong about it, then that's a pretty grave error.
Chip Towers does a great job. We've had him on before.
But, it's been several people. But John Canzano, who's the Oregon guy who's been really kind of all over this, says Dan Lanning report is not accurate per reliable source. Report indicated Dan Lanning was leaving Georgia to become Oregon head coach. Not true, I'm told. And some people are saying that he's a candidate, but nothing's been.
He's also the one that said Dave Aranda was going to Oregon, but most likely the top choice of Oregon, and he's not even talking to Oregon. Hasn't talked to them, won't talk to them, at least we're talking about now as far as for this year. So. Yeah,
so regardless of what happens to the Oregon job, it's not going to affect Aranda. But, it is interesting, though, because Sataki, I guess, like, he signed that contract, so that's done. But, it's curious to see who else is in the mix, because I just saw – another report, UO source says Oregon has not offered, nor has the job been accepted by Dan Lanning or anyone else. He's a candidate. He is not hired. So there's just another person on top of, I think, James Crapia.
Well, we would have James on, but we don't have an hour. He's a great guy. He's a great guest.
I think that, but look, if Oregon fans wanted Dave Aranda, and they're not going to get him, then I think the next closest two hires that you could make to Dave Aranda would be Marcus Freeman, who you're not going to get because he's already at Notre Dame, and Dan Lanning. I think Dan Lanning is in that same kind of mold of Dave Aranda, of a defensive mastermind and a young and up-and-coming guy. I think Dan Lanning would be a home run. Now, granted, I think the question about Dan Lanning probably remains for a lot of people is Dan Lanning the defensive mind there, or is it still Kirby Smart, who is still, one of the best defensive minds in the game?
Yeah, I think that most people probably give Dan Lanning their props. But, it's kind of like the Jeff Lebby and Lane Kiffin thing of like, how much of that was Jeff Lebby and how, also Lane Kiffin was calling plays. So you can kind of wonder about that a little bit. But certainly I think regardless of who's got input, those two, Lebby and Lanning, have proven they're really good coordinators. And so Lanning, if that would be a home run for Oregon. Now, the curious thing I have is just the defensive-minded part of it. I saw where, maybe, and again, it's rumors and all that, but, Oregon's known for one thing, besides flashy uniforms.
Blitz and glamour and offense.
Yeah, offense and flash. And so I don't know, but, you go hire a flashy offensive coordinator, but you got to hire a head coach first, and it's not Dan Lanning as of right now, so that's kind of a weird 180 we just took.
Their best player was a defensive lineman, though. Who's declared for the draft.
Yeah.
By the way, whatever happens with Lanning and Oregon, Georgia and Oregon next year open up.
Yep.
They'll open up next season against each other in the Chick-fil-A kickoff game in Atlanta at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So that will be of interest if Dan Lanning's coming back to face his team that he's on coaching now. And, of course, the bowl game. We'll see how this irons out in the next hour or two.
I must say it has been quite enjoyable, even though there was a couple moments early on where, Aranda's name starts getting thrown out there because there was just so many jobs open. Oklahoma and just all the rest of them that popped open. And then, one by one they get eliminated and, he's pretty firmly entrenched. But it's been nice to kind of have a little bit enough insight to not sweat the Oregon job or please on UCLA. I'm not going to worry about that one iota. But to kind of just look around at the rest of these schools going through these coaching jobs, like right now, can you imagine what Oregon fan is thinking? You just celebrated 5 minutes ago that Dan Lanning was your next head coach probably, and now you're like, wait, what? To be on the outside after we've seen a couple of coaching searches around here, to kind of just observe it from a faraway viewpoint, very interesting, very stressful for the fan bases involved, that's for sure.
When we come back, we're going to hear from